This week's blog post is the first in a series on the St. Gaudens National Historical Park. A little background. Augustus St. Gaudens, 1848 to 1907, was one of America's best sculptors. In 1885, when his career was taking off, he and his family began to spend time in Cornish, New Hampshire, to escape the summer heat of New York City. Many artists followed him there, including painters, Maxfield Parrish, Kenyon Cox, and others, novelists, architects, and sculptors, Paul Manship, Herbert Adams, and others. This group became known as the Cornish colony. St. Gaudens' widow, who lived until 1926, bequeathed the family's New Hampshire property for use as a museum. The St. Gaudens National Historical Park, run by the National Park Service, is in Cornish, New Hampshire, not far off I-91. The park's collection includes exact casts or meticulous copies of many of St. Gaudens' most important works, as well as some originals. In the next few posts, I will show you items roughly in the order in which I saw them when I visited the park. For a short biography of St. Gaudens and a chronological survey of his works, see my book Artists, Entrepreneurs. When you go to the site, there is the Visitor Center, there's a new gallery with a lot of works, there's a house over here, and the studio. And then there's something over here called the temple. Alright, we will look first at the Standing Lincoln from 1887. By the 1880s, tens of thousands of Americans still remembered how President Abraham Lincoln looked, and dozens of sculptures had been created to memorialize him. I've given you some samples on Artists Entrepreneurs, pages 21 to 25. But it was St. Gaudens' interpretation of Lincoln that set the standard for Lincoln portraits, a gaunt figure with head bowed, deep in thought. He stands in front of a very presidential chair with an eagle spreading its wings across the back. The Standing Lincoln was the first sculpture St. Gaudens modeled after he began summering in Cornish. This copy stands near the Visitor Center. The copy at the park is a very impressive work, but the original version in Chicago has a setting that makes it quite stunning. It's set off from the park that surrounds it by a wide platform and a set of steps. At either end of the platform, here, and it would be over to the right here, at either end of the platform are spheres that bear excerpts from Lincoln's most famous speeches. Next up is the Colonel Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, 1897. Shaw, a member of a Boston family that was prominent in the abolition movement, led the first regiment of black soldiers who fought in the Civil War. He died, with many of his men, in an attack on Fort Wagner in Charleston, South Carolina. The movie Glory, Matthew Broderick, is based on Shaw's life. The St. Gaudens National Historical Parks cast is the final version of St. Gaudens' design, with slight modifications from the original in Boston. It's an indication of how proud Bostonians were of Shaw that this memorial was sited on the Boston Common. But if you want to look at the Shaw Memorial without getting bumped by pedestrians, then the park is a much better place than the Boston Common. Here's Shaw himself leading his troops, and this is the angel that is above Shaw and his troops. One of the remarkable things about the Shaw Memorial is that it has more than a dozen soldiers. They're all dressed in uniform, and yet none of the details are repeated. Not the faces, not the angles of the rifles, not even the pant legs and the shoes of the marching men. And the last piece for this week, the Adams Memorial, 1891. The Adams Memorial was created for Marion Clover Hooper Adams, 1843 to 1885, who was the wife of historian Henry Adams. Adams specified that the sculpture not be a portrait of his wife. He suggested a figure reminiscent of the Buddha or of one of the painted images on Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. St. Gaudens spent 3 years working on the Adams Memorial, smashing at least 3 models in the process. The figure he finally designed has been interpreted as hope, serenity, atheism, or despair. Henry Adams called it the peace of God. St. Gaudens referred to it as the mystery of the hereafter, beyond the pain and beyond joy. The setting at the St. Gaudens National Historical Park is in a clearing in a grove of trees. You can see it here. It's reminiscent of the outdoor room that was designed for the original sculpture by Stanford White. The original sculpture is in Rock Creek Cemetery in Washington, D.C. DianeDurantewriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on dianerantewriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.